I appreciate that, Brian. Let's segue into the evolution of aerospace technology. Spend 5 minutes on that and just let's talk about more of your experience, where you think we're headed.
Okay, I want to start that. In the days of early space, can anyone here name the rockets that were used for Gemini or Mercury or the Russian rockets? Does anybody remember the names of any of them? No? Agena, Atlas, Delta? No. The reason you can't name any of them is because we, even though we weren't the first to space, we built the Saturn rocket. This was on John Kennedy's statement in '63 that we're going to the moon by the end of the decade, and we did it. We landed in '69. The entire reason that the space program was saved from the depredations of Congress, who immediately, particularly people who opposed Kennedy, wanted to gut it of money, was the appearance of the astronauts. And the people at NASA who were in charge of public affairs knew that and understood it. And most of you were not even born in those days. But every day, as the programs began to expand, we saw pictures of the astronauts and their families. We saw the first incredible photography from space. We watched the early empty Apollo ships go up. But all the time, there were those fantastically cool-looking suits and the gold helmets and all of the trappings of space. And that integration of media and public affairs and having the government support a program that was initially wasn't thought to bring any benefits. All of this, in view of the arms race, made it absolutely a slide to get the Saturn program funded from beginning to finish. After that, who can remember any manned space after 1975? That was a trick question. We did go up again, obviously, in the shuttle. And the shuttle's original purpose was to move things, not people, into Earth orbit, which it did very well. The Hubble telescope was put up there. Many systems were put up there. And at first, the shuttle astronauts were on TV all the time. And there were pictures of people releasing a bubble of water into zero grav or people's hair standing on it. And it kept the interest up. But in fact, the shuttle was a military program. And one of the realities of being involved in aerospace is understanding the technical and economic requirements of human spaceflight versus everything else. Today, we would never build a manned shuttle. There's no reason to. We've got robotic systems. The Russians, the Kvants, the Progresses, they're robotic. There's still issues, but the cost of putting a human being on the nose of a rocket can sometimes be equivalent to the entire cost of developing the rocket, because life support systems and safety systems have to be integrated into all the ship's other systems. They're very power intensive. I believe that the next generation of spaceflight, human spaceflight, will consist of some necessary missions, even regrettably military missions, but the rest of it will be just regular old engineers and manufacturing people going up and doing things like building habitats on the moon and Mars. We'll get to Mars. Probably I won't be alive, but we should be able to get there pretty damn soon. And now that I'm who I am and where I am, I also know that we can do it, which is nice. It's a very satisfying feeling. We'll be building moon habitation very quickly. I'd say within the next 3 years, we'll be sending machinery up to the moon. There are huge challenges, again, in the costs of putting people rather than simple machinery up there, but it's going to need people to do it. So if you're interested in the field in general, learn something about what it takes to put people on board ships or in spacecraft. If you're not particularly interested and you're more interested in technology, it still doesn't hurt. It still won't hurt you at all if you want to make a career in space. The Lunar Industrial Base, Reagan's done a superb job of organizing some of our thoughts and categories. The Lunar Industrial Base is going to occupy at least 100,000 engineers. At least. This is globally. Hopefully there'll be a good contingent from CSA or the private sector in Canada. probably from Avro, if I know my companies, and Bombardier and de Havilland and others. But that lunar industrial base is going to be the big focal point. And we're going to.
Why is that, Brian?
It makes sense. It makes economic sense. Does anybody know why Mars is red?
The dirt?
Yeah. Why is Mars red? What's the cause of that color? It's rust. That's all it is. The surface of Mars is oxidized ferrous metal. That's why it's red. If you bake oxidized metal in a non-oxygen atmosphere, it produces oxygen. We'll be able to produce oxygen easily on the surface of Mars once the machinery gets there. Does anybody know what the surface of the moon consists of?
Helium-2.
A thimble full of helium-2 would cost more money running a province in Canada. Yes, there is helium. It's helium-3, but the production of helium-3 is a part of the manufacturing process. The surface of the moon is dust. It's finer than flour. It's micrometer, and some of it nanometer, is ground up meteorites. This is 2 billion years of rocks coming in from space and smashing each other to bits and fragments. Under the craters that you see on the moon today are thousands of other craters that were obliterated. That dust is iron, nickel, and quartz. We're not ever going to run out of iron on Earth, but as you drill into the surface of the moon, there are materials that can be used to make oxygen, to make hydrogen. There may be what's called juvenile water on the moon, which means water that's never been exposed to the surface. And there are obvious markings of water ice on Mars. So when we get there, we'll be people who, for the very first time, come across the plains of North Dakota. Here you've got the richest soil, or Alberta or Saskatchewan, right? Have the richest soil, but how are you going to irrigate it? How are you going to exploit this resource? And the lunar industrial base will be the focal point for that. I predict that we're going to see Rio Tinto, which is you folks, and Anaconda, and every one of the great mining and extraction companies, global extraction companies, with bases on the moon.
That's amazing, Brian. And the other element, the moon with its low gravitational pull, is also going to allow us to build the ships to go to Mars. And
for those of you who are introduced, have ISAm, which is in space assembly and manufacturing. Manufacturing in space is a fool's errand. It will probably be very necessary on the surface of Mars, where you've got a little bit of gravity. I think it's 12.5%, about a sixth gravity of Earth. But manufacturing in space presents ridiculous logistics problems. Assembly is another thing, and Reagan was right to point out the great Mars ships will be built in orbit. We'll be sending up bits and pieces, just like we did from the space station. And parts of those rockets that go up, Artemis, Starship, what have you, will be used as fuel tanks to prepare, and habitation units to prepare for these extreme long duration voyages. So assembly in space and assembly and orbiting around the moon for these great projects will become a huge industry with opportunities for any kind of employment.
yeah. Oh, that's great, Brian. Thank you. That's paints a really good picture, an exciting future as well. So we have Gate here with researchers and students and graduates, and really want to lean on your experience and speak to them about education, mentorship, and just provide some wisdom to help these individuals with their careers and advancing their lives in their respective fields.
What I want to do is speak with you, not to you, not so much as a teacher, which I've been fortunate enough to do. I actually teach space mission analysis and design and spacecraft systems engineering, which is great fun for me and eye-opening sometimes for my students. But I want to go back to my experience at the airport all these years ago. By sheer chance, I fell into the company of those people. The reason for that was that a small group of people trusted me enough to give a young person the chance to work at Rand. I wasn't there very long on a limited basis, but it gave me the basis for credibility. And all my life, we all hear it's the people it doesn't matter really, and nothing else matters.
Isn't luck when preparation meets opportunity?
Of course, and that's well said. But it's not really the people you know; it's the people who know you and trust you. And that's a very small circle when you're young. This isn't like being a rock star. Mentorship doesn't just happen. For those of you who are already adults and embarked on your career, as well as for those among you who are looking for a new career or still studying, go to the people who teach you or who respect you or like you, and not find out. And what intrigues you about them is what you should ask them about. For instance, let's say when Reagan and I first met, I said, Avro, and tell me all about it. Within 2 minutes, I knew that he was sharp. I knew he had remember my enthusiasm and energy, but I also understood that he was embarked on the voyage of discovery. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a friend and colleague who is chief of aeronautics at NASA, Stephen Hirshhorn. And we got to talking about how we got in this business. And he said, I'm not sure how to put this. He said, I literally cannot stop learning. He's 60 something. And he said, every time something catches my eye, I'm like a magpie and I go chasing it. And I said, that's the discovery. And he says, yeah, Brian, that's exactly what it is. The world is composed for the most part of explorers, the people who go out there and find that broad expanse in central Canada or the mountains or whatever, and then the people who come and settle it. Some of us are explorers, some of us are builders, some are, if you're lucky, you're both. Mentorship, this isn't about going to the professor every couple of days in his office. This is about finding people, cultivating those relationships. This isn't about manipulating or exploiting people. It's going to them and saying, look, I don't know jack about this, but I'm fascinated. Do you have a little bit of time? And the smart ones will say, yeah, buy me a bottle of wine and I'll talk my head off. It really does work like that. The people that you like and trust in your everyday life, ask them about things that are interesting to you and perhaps interesting to them, and maybe they'll steer you to somebody. I believe in this. I've hired between 1,200 and 1,500 people in my career, many of my own students, I was fortunate to say. And that curiosity and the willingness to take the risk of connecting with people who may tell you to get lost, it's essential. Really read my lips on this. You have got to know people who can come to learn to trust you.
A good element of that is showing vulnerability.
Yeah.
And asking for help. People typically want to help. If we hold it close to our chest, though, and don't show that vulnerability, I don't think you really ever give that opportunity for that professor to acknowledge that this person may be a good fit.
You all are bright people. You wouldn't be, you're here because you're bright people and curious. This is precisely true. Vulnerability is a big problem for a lot of people. Most of my life in private situations, I'm very shy. I know I don't sound like it, but I have minor panic attacks and all of that. I've overcome it because I've lived so damn long. And you can't really display that kind of behavior. But I finally got over my unwillingness to say, could I ask you a big favor? Or could I ask you to help me on something? I don't know how to do this, or I want to learn. For some people, pride just prevents them from doing it.
Exactly.
So, I don't want to go on and on about all the platitudes, apply yourself and all of that stuff.